engineer's personal diary of the YF-12 program, or one of the Blackbirds. And he kept meticulous notes on everything that was done on that program every day. And it was a spectacular historical record. And this was in a safe at Lockheed, because it was still considered sensitive at the time, back in the 1970s and 80s. And when they went through this whole process of reconfiguring the markings and storage, all the stuff, that was something that was deemed unnecessary because the YF-12 was a canceled program, so it got shredded, and that valuable piece of history was lost forever.
This just keeps on coming up again and again, doesn't it? They keep on destroying our national history.
Yeah.
It just keeps on coming up here. Wow. Peter, could the information be stored in those smaller buildings in back of the L-1011 hangar? Something in there?
Lockheed's got a big plant out at Air Force Plant 42, and there's a lot of different buildings. Who knows what's in there? I've heard rumors of wind tunnel models of early stealth designs and Blackbirds and different things, and whether that's true or not, I don't know. I've never seen any of it. But I'd like to believe that they are hanging on to some of this stuff. I do know some of the material related to Have Blue was saved, and that was revealed in Air and Space magazine, of all places. They allowed a photographer to take a few pictures of some of these documents and models and things that had been retained by the company, and which at least they saw that there was some value to retaining that heritage, preserving it.
So, Peter, whose jurisdiction does this material fall under? Is it proprietary Lockheed, or is it the customer Air Force? Who owns it?
There's a mix of different things. Some documents are clearly Air Force, and in those cases, if a person wants to try to see them, to get them declassified, you can file a Freedom of Information Act request. The FOIA is a very powerful tool, and you can frequently get at least a partial document. Some sensitive material may be redacted, but a lot of the time you can get some really good stuff. But material that is considered proprietary is exempt from FOIA, and so some of these Lockheed reports, regrettably, the only way to get them is to appeal to the good-hearted nature of the folks at Lockheed Martin.
All right. Peter, what other spooky planes do you think then Air Force Chief of Staff General Larry D. Welch has been briefed on?
Let's see. Well, what time frame are we talking about?
Talking
80s?
Yes,
okay.
About that time.
Yeah, I have a sense just from talking to various people and seeing little tidbits and documentation that from about the mid-1980s to the mid-1990s, there were probably a fair number of secret projects that have yet to be declassified. Now, we're not just talking manned aircraft, but also a lot of unmanned aerial vehicles of all different sizes, prototypes for high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft. I don't know how much of that made it from the wind tunnel to flight hardware, but there was a lot of concept studies, and there were definitely some demonstrators flown, some prototypes. And there are rumors that some of those demonstrators led to production aircraft, but there has been surprisingly no leak of information to reveal what those might be. And this is very different from what happened with the F-117 and Have Blue. In the late 1970s, we learned that there was such a thing as a stealth program being developed because the Carter administration announced that, which really ticked off a lot of people at the Pentagon who thought that stealth should be completely top secret and that nobody should know about it outside the program. And some of that was leaked as a political move, just to show that we were maintaining this forward-looking defense posture. But the Have Blue demonstrators were built and tested with remarkable secrecy, and yet some little bits of rumors got out to the press, like Aviation Week and Space Technology and others, who reported that there was this stealth fighter prototype in development. And the F-117 was the production follow-on to Have Blue. They produced 59 production aircraft and several pre-production test aircraft. And these were flown, again, with great secrecy at Groom Lake, Nevada and Tonopah Test Range. And there were reports of eyewitness sightings in the dead of night of strange pointy airplanes flying overhead in Nevada and California. You know, there were some blurry pictures that seemed to show something of that nature. And then an airplane crashed near Bakersfield, California. At the time, the Air Force had a really good cover story in place. They could have said it was an A-7, which is a conventional attack aircraft that was supposedly being used for testing secret electronics. But instead, the Air Force spokesman said, "We can't tell you what crashed." And it became a media circus. The most surprising aspect of that was that the news stories at the time reported that 50 to 70 stealth fighters had been built and that they were based at Tonopah Test Range and that they'd been tested at Groom Lake. And all of this was true. It was surprisingly accurate reporting for a program that was nominally completely in the black, an unacknowledged special access program. But yet a substantial amount of information leaked out. We have had no similar leaks since then. Tacit Blue was a one-off stealth demonstrator, and the most that ever came out of that during its 3 years of testing was a rumor of a funny-looking airplane that was supposedly nicknamed Shamu, or the Whale. At the time, a lot of people generally assumed that it was like a mini B-2. It turned out to look like a flying Twinkie with straight wings. Not at all what we expected once they declassified it in 1996. But you know, there are definitely other programs that have been flown, and it's just surprising how little information has come out.
Okay. Peter, whatever happened to the drawings, documents, and blueprints regarding stealth technology which were stored at the Division of Low Observables on the 5th floor of the Pentagon's D-Ring?
That's a good question. I have no idea. And remind me again, is D-Ring the outer ring or the inner ring?
You know what? I'm not 100% sure.
Well, and it's interesting to just talk about the Pentagon for a minute in terms of storing classified information, which I'm sure there's quite a bit there. One of the very secret programs that was conducted by the Air Force in the 1970s and 80s was called Constant Peg, and the government had acquired a large number of Soviet fighter aircraft, mostly MiG-17s, 21s, and 23s, and flew them first at Groom Lake and then at Tonopah Test Range to develop combat tactics against Eastern Bloc aircraft. And of course, it's a huge program. They exposed more than 6,000 American airmen to encounters with these Russian aircraft, so it was impossible to keep it completely secret. But all of the documentation for that program, a program history of Constant Peg, films, photographs, and other important stuff, was stored in a vault at the Pentagon. And eventually, the program was declassified. Well, that's all well and good, and you would say, well, great, now you can release all that, program history that you stored so carefully all these years, except that particular vault was destroyed on 9/11/2001 when terrorists flew an airplane into the Pentagon. And so all that history was lost, despite the fact that it would have been releasable within a few years.
Wow, okay. Wow. Peter, what do you think may have been stored in the secure vault in room H405 at the Pentagon?
I'm not familiar with that room.
Okay. According to the Washington Post, October 9th, 1989, in the early 1980s, Air Force stealth projects fell under the control of Paul Kaminsky. What other still secret programs was he in charge of?
I don't know. I don't know what else Kaminsky was involved in.
Okay. In 1985, a meeting was held at the Pentagon where then Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger was encouraged to gradually declassify 14 SAR programs. He refused and only declassified an anti-radar missile, leaving 13 other programs in the black. Peter, what do you think these other 13 programs might be?
I can only speculate on what some of the other black programs might have been. There have been classified missile programs, air-to-air missiles. Some of those might have been ramjet-powered hypersonic missiles or advanced anti-radar missiles. There have been plenty of programs involving unmanned aerial vehicles for reconnaissance and probably combat as well. And there may have been other manned aircraft, but I just don't have any information.
Okay. Peter, since winning the contract for the ATB in October 1981 to the rollout of the first B-2 in Palmdale on November 22nd, 1988, Northrop spent $22.4 billion. Peter, where did all the money go?
There is a huge black hole of black projects in which all this money goes into to fund different programs. Unfortunately, the classified nature of these programs makes it impossible to track most individual programs. Occasionally there will be a budget document that gives a program element number and a figure that goes with it. You know, sometimes it's just, you know, it just says classified and you just can't follow up. One that caused a lot of confusion in the mid-1980s was Aurora, which ultimately proved to be funding for the development of the B-2. It was just a big pot of money that was put under a classified nickname, Aurora. And it consisted of quite a few billions of dollars, but because it was listed along with some of the strategic reconnaissance programs, such as the SR-71, observers who came across it in the mid-1980s thought it might have been a replacement for the Blackbird, but this doesn't seem to be the case. People I've talked to who not only worked on the B-2 and also at Lockheed and Ben Ridge even, and people who worked at the Pentagon and hypersonic programs have said no, Aurora was just B-2 funding.
Okay. Peter, please describe the $4.78 billion fixed-price contract for full-scale development which was awarded to McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics for the A-12 Avenger II.
Okay, yeah, the A-12 Avenger II program proved to be a real embarrassment ultimately. It started as the Advanced Tactical Aircraft, and it was meant to be a stealthy fighter attack airplane that could be launched from the deck of an aircraft carrier. It was essentially just an equilateral triangle with no tail surfaces. It just it was a very stealthy shape, and the government poured something like $5 billion worth of funding into this, and it never got much further than the mock-up stage. There were some pieces of hardware that were built, and at one point, I think Ben Ridge said that he was called in to advise on some of the stealthy characteristics and how to improve that. But the program was finally canceled and became a legal issue. A lot of the people who were involved in the pioneering days of stealth had to get involved in this big legal brouhaha, which I think eventually got settled, but I don't remember what the results were.
Okay. Peter, which parts of the A-12 were designed by the McDonnell Douglas facility in St. Louis and the General Dynamics facility in Fort Worth?
I'm not really sure what the breakdown was on the A-12 as far as who designed which parts. McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics split the production, and I've only seen some parts. There was a canopy and some parts of an airframe and a mock-up that was built, but I think the mock-up went to a museum.
It did go to a museum. During the design phase, how did the A-12 end up 8,000 pounds overweight, 18 months behind schedule, and $1 billion over budget?
Well, now The A-12 Avenger II suffered from the sort of requirements creep that frequently inflicts a program. You start out with a concept, and the company that's building it promises that it's going to be a certain weight, it will have certain performance characteristics. But then as you actually begin building the thing, it turns out that you need to beef up the structure here and do something else for the weapons system, and pretty soon you're adding a lot more weight. And the Avenger II ended up being overweight, and of course all the changes drove it behind schedule, and this pushed the costs up even further. So these are the elements that eventually led to it being canceled.
Peter, describe what caused the cost overruns and delays on the A-12. You touched on this a little bit, but...
Yeah, I'm not sufficiently familiar to really go into any more detail. I just know the generalities of it.
Okay. Peter, why did Defense Secretary Dick Cheney cancel the A-12 Avenger II program on January 7th, 1991? Was it the fault of the defense contractors or the Navy?
I think there's probably a lot of blame to go around as to how the Avenger II got canceled. Between the company pretty much taking on an aircraft of a type that they'd never built before, so there's undoubtedly a learning curve there, and the Navy having specific requirements that had to be met. I think all of that sort of combined to ultimately drive the cost up and push the schedule back. And it's a story we've seen again and again. The Lockheed Martin X-33 is a classic example of in this case, an X-plane that should have been pretty straightforward, but they got a little too ambitious, and so the program got further and further behind schedule and more expensive until eventually it was canceled before even being finished.
That's okay.
Sorry?
That's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?